What does it feel like to be hunted by yourself holding a bow and arrow in a dream? Or to freely enter someone else's dream, spying on everything, and even carrying out a ruthless hunt within their dream? If this all happened to you, what would you do? The girl sat in a chair, and suddenly the coffee table in front of her was shattered by an unknown object. Then, a shoe fell into the sink, strange things kept happening, and she looked anxiously at the sky. Next, a stranger fell into the sink, creating a huge splash of water. She shouted for her father, who was sweeping leaves in the yard, but her father simply turned around calmly to look. The next moment, the girl suddenly floated up without warning, crying out loudly for her father's help. But her father still just quietly observed everything that was happening. It turned out that this was the girl's dream. Her father, Paul, after hearing his daughter's description, seriously told her that if such a thing happened in real life, he definitely wouldn't remain indifferent and would fight desperately to protect her. But is the girl's dream really that simple? Paul is an ordinary university biology professor, leading a monotonous life, going back and forth between home and work every day. One day, Paul was teaching as usual, but there were two students in the class whispering to each other. Paul initially thought they were just distracted, but he didn't realize that what they were talking about was something no one could explain, and it was quickly gaining traction and spreading. After class, Paul invited the editor-in-chief of a publishing company to lunch. He had been wanting to publish a book on his years of research in biology, hoping to make an exciting mark on his otherwise ordinary life, and also bring in some substantial income for his family. But the editor-in-chief wasn't interested. As expected, Paul was rejected. Afterward, he was preparing to drive to the cinema to meet his wife, to watch a movie together as they had planned. When Paul was waiting outside the cinema for his wife, a stranger kept staring at him for no reason. This made Paul, who was already in a bad mood, feel even more uneasy. At that moment, his wife arrived and asked how things went with the book publication. Having been rejected, Paul, driven by his pride, lied to his wife, saying that there were still many academic issues to resolve, and the whole thing was still slowly progressing. The day's setbacks left Paul feeling depressed and in no mood to watch the movie. After the movie ended, when Paul and his wife were walking out of the theater, Paul's ex-girlfriend called out to him. Paul, who had 2 children now, was at a loss when seeing his ex-girlfriend. Seeing the awkward look on his face, his ex-girlfriend revealed the truth. She said that Paul had been appearing frequently in her nightmares lately. No matter what was happening in the dream, Paul would just quietly stand by and watch. The next day, Paul went to work as usual, but he vaguely overheard many students discussing his name, which puzzled him. After work, when Paul returned home, he suddenly received a call from a long-lost classmate, saying something very interesting had happened at a recent class reunion. Everyone at the reunion, including people who didn't know Paul, had dreamt of Paul. This strange event immediately shocked everyone present. Later, Paul logged into his social media account and found that he had mysteriously received tens of thousands of comments and gained hundreds of thousands of new followers. These followers claimed they had dreamt of Paul, and even the media wanted to interview him. The sudden attention left Paul utterly confused. For someone who had always lacked presence, this felt like a huge, unexpected stroke of luck. The next day, Paul went to work as usual, but the class attendance was unexpectedly high, with some students auditing the class as well. Everyone warmly welcomed this middle-aged professor. It turned out that everyone in the classroom had dreamt of Paul, and out of curiosity, Paul asked them to share their dreams. A boy said he dreamt of himself wearing a strange tailcoat, eating a strange ice cream, and the people around him stood still, as if praying or avoiding something. Suddenly, a blood-soaked monster chased him. He instinctively turned and ran, hiding behind a strange tree. At that moment, Paul appeared beside the boy, staring blankly at the strange trees, as though nothing had happened. Then, the boy woke up. He didn't know what the dream meant. Next was a girl's dream. In her dream, there was a sudden earthquake, and the girl crouched down in fear. Some people tried to flee, others were dazed. The girl, confused by everything happening around her, watched as Paul calmly walked into the classroom, looking at the chaos with indifference. This was the girl's dream. Similarly, the girl couldn't explain why Paul appeared in her dream. Then, another girl dreamed that she was sitting on top of a piano, with 2 crocodiles lying on the floor. Next, Paul appeared. He glanced at the girl and then turned and left. Up until now, the dreams described by everyone had all featured Paul, But in each one, Paul was merely an observer. This was consistent with his real-life existence. He had no sense of presence. Paul then asked if anyone had noticed what he was doing in their dreams. Unfortunately, the responses were surprisingly unanimous. In their dreams, Paul only stood quietly and watched everything unfold. But this didn't affect the fact that, through their dreams, everyone had begun to notice Paul's existence. Overnight, Paul became the most popular teacher at the school. After class, students lined up to take pictures with him. When he got home, his eldest daughter was unusually affectionate towards him, because her classmates, upon learning that Paul was her father, started getting closer to her. Even his youngest daughter, for the first time ever, asked Paul to take her to school. The attention his daughters gave him made Paul feel more present than ever. Even his wife, thanks to Paul, had gained attention at her company. Just as everything seemed to be moving in a positive direction, one night, a strange man sneaked into Paul's house holding a fruit knife, mumbling that he had to kill Paul. The loud noise woke up the couple, who were both completely confused, and a terrifying atmosphere spread through the house. But the next second, the man with the knife slumped into the corner of the wall, repeatedly muttering that he had to kill Paul. When the police arrived and took the man away, they explained to the couple that he was a mental patient. A few days earlier, his doctor had discharged him after noticing his recovery, but the police suspected he had relapsed last night. But was this just a simple case of a mentally ill person attacking the professor? After this shocking incident, Paul's wife began to feel uneasy about his sudden rise to fame. She told Paul that the strange events were happening because of his newfound popularity. Paul, however, dismissed her concerns, telling her that his fame was beyond his control. In reality, Paul was enjoying the changes that fame brought to his life. Soon after, Paul was invited by a prominent internet company. When they met, the company representative immediately started praising Paul. Paul couldn't help but enjoy the attention, since no one had ever treated him this way before. The representative cut to the chase and explained their interest in Paul. They wanted to know how Paul appeared in everyone's dreams, and they were hoping to form a business partnership with him. Paul, thrilled by this opportunity, eagerly agreed. He also shared his own idea. He wanted to publish a book he had written. The representative agreed, saying that as long as there was attention and traffic, nothing would be an issue. The two quickly reached an agreement, just needing to finalize the details on paper. The representative told Paul to go home and wait for the good news about the contract. That night, in his daughter's bedroom, Paul suddenly burst out of the closet, scaring his daughter so much that she screamed loudly. It turned out, this was just a dream his daughter had. Meanwhile, Paul went to a female classmate's house, saying he needed her help. But when Paul entered, he began speaking in an incomprehensible language, and the girl felt that this Paul in front of her wasn't the professor she knew at all. Although he had Paul's face, he seemed extremely strange. The frightened girl asked Paul to leave the room. Paul slowly walked up to the girl, and the next second, he suddenly grabbed her by the neck. Then, a boy was walking down the street alone when Paul suddenly jumped out from the side, holding a hammer and smashing it down onto the boy's head. The next day, Paul went to work as usual, but when he entered the classroom, he found only a few students in their seats. The sudden change left Paul confused and unsure of what to do. Paul went to the principal to inquire about what was happening. It turned out that all the students who didn't show up for class had dreamt of Paul the previous night. In their dreams, without exception, they had Paul forcefully killing them in various ways. Now, whenever the students thought of Paul, they became anxious, and they couldn't even bear to be in the same classroom with him. Paul couldn't understand it and thought it was absurd. Just because they had a nightmare, they couldn't come to his class? Faced with Paul's questioning, the principal explained that there was no effective way to handle such collective behavior, and they had to respect the students' choices. He promised Paul that he would think of a solution. After class, the principal arranged for the school's psychologist to gather the students who had skipped class for some counseling. After a lengthy build-up, the psychologist invited Paul in. As Paul slowly walked toward the group, the eyes of every student radiated an unmistakable fear. Just as Paul was about to speak, all the students, unable to endure the overwhelming fear, hurriedly fled from the classroom. Paul looked at the now empty seats, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness instantly surged in his heart. With no other choice, Paul reluctantly grabbed his backpack and headed home. When he reached the parking lot, he was shocked to find that even his commute car had been spray-painted with the word loser by the students. Furious, Paul immediately exploded, demanding to know who was responsible for this. In response, the students mocked him coldly. When he got home, his family questioned him about what he had done to bring things to such a point. At this moment, Paul said that he hadn't done anything, but no one believed him, not even his family. The next day, because of Paul's actions, his wife was kicked out of her work group at the company and was relegated to handling some trivial tasks. As for Paul, due to the nightmares, he missed out on a major collaboration with the internet giant. The company canceled the partnership with Paul. Even when Paul went to a restaurant he frequently visited, he was ostracized. A man told Paul to leave, saying that everyone in the restaurant did not want to see his face. Paul replied that he had the right to stay and would not leave. The next second, a bald man picked up Paul's plate and spat into it. This action enraged Paul, and he immediately lashed out. But the result was obvious. Paul was brutally taught a lesson. When his wife heard about Paul's troubles, she came to pick him up and bring him home. Upon seeing Paul's predicament, instead of offering any comfort, she began to complain about him. The harassing phone calls at home kept coming in. His daughter was being ostracized at school, and even she almost lost her job. His current situation was all because of him. His wife felt that Paul should issue a public apology to ease the current situation, but Paul didn't think he needed to apologize, because he hadn't done anything wrong. All of this had been forced upon him, and it had nothing to do with him. The couple then began a cold war, with Paul sleeping on the couch downstairs. That night, Paul dreamed that he was running down an empty street when suddenly, an arrow struck his arm. Paul was unable to pull it out. Then, a person dressed in camouflage appeared behind him with a bow and arrow, and Paul, frightened, could only run away. The second arrow hit him, and Paul, now carrying 2 arrows in his back, breathlessly ran to a small house and sat down. To his shock, he realized that the person chasing him was himself. Holding a bow and arrow, Paul grinned eerily and then mercilessly pulled the trigger. At his daughter's school, the homeroom teacher was having a conversation with Paul and his wife. The graduation ceremony was approaching. The teacher said that, to avoid unnecessary trouble, they hoped Paul wouldn't attend, because whether from the parents or the students, Paul would bring them endless fear. Paul, hearing this, strongly disagreed, stating that he hadn't done anything wrong, and this was extremely unfair to him. His wife, however, agreed with the teacher's decision and told Paul that perhaps it was the best choice. Hearing his wife's words only made Paul's inner turmoil grow. At this point, Paul was completely isolated. Even his family refused to stand by him. When he got home, Paul finally lost control of his emotions and tearfully spoke into the camera about everything he had been through in recent days. He apologized to everyone, even though he didn't know what he had done wrong or why he was apologizing, but he sincerely said every word, hoping that everyone would forgive him and let him return to a peaceful life. His apology quickly spread online. When his daughter saw his performance, she felt that Paul had failed, and she thought her father had embarrassed her. When his wife learned of the situation, she also questioned Paul about why he had apologized in such a manner. She felt that Paul's actions were humiliating, and she called him a hypocritical, selfish fool. But Paul didn't think there was anything wrong with what he had done. "Didn't you tell me to apologize?" "Well, this is my true expression of feelings. Did something go wrong again?" The two of them ended up parting on bad terms. At his daughter's graduation ceremony, Paul felt that as a father, he had to attend his daughter's performance. When he arrived at the school hall, the homeroom teacher saw him and refused to let Paul enter. As they argued, the teacher suddenly slammed the doors of the hall, but in doing so, the teacher accidentally injured his hand. Paul looked at the teacher's injured hand, unsure of how to respond. To his surprise, the teacher accused Paul of attacking him. This sudden defamation left Paul panicked. No matter how Paul tried to explain, the teacher still portrayed himself as the victim. Soon, several students' parents arrived and helped hold Paul down. After the commotion, the events that transpired at the school became the final straw that broke the marriage between Paul and his wife. Although Paul felt immense regret, he had no choice but to accept the current reality. At this time, some tech companies, sensing an opportunity, launched a dream entering bracelet. Anyone who wore it to sleep could open their permissions, allowing others to enter their dreams. In a short time, Paul experienced the biggest rise and fall in his life, from overnight fame to utter disgrace, and even losing his family. For Paul, everything happened too quickly, leaving him unprepared. Reflecting on everything that had happened recently, a sense of helplessness filled his body, and he could not suppress his longing for his wife and children. With no other option, he resorted to the dream-entering bracelet, hoping to see his family in a dream again. In the dream, his wife was trapped in a circle of fire, and Paul, wearing an extravagant suit, slowly walked toward her. When his wife saw him, she didn't show fear or disgust. Instead, she had a calm and happy expression. Paul reached out and rescued her, Afterward, the two of them walked hand in hand until morning. They didn't say a word the entire time. Perhaps, at that moment, Paul felt that a single glance was worth more than 1,000 words. In the dream, Paul enjoyed the rare peace and happiness.